Hello, I'm Locke Meredith. I'd like to invite you to join me on my next show, Legal Lines. We're going to have Beau Box on. He's a commercial real estate broker here in Baton Rouge. We're going to talk about investments in commercial real estate. We're also going to talk about those great deals you hear about, the condo pre-sales in Alabama and Florida. So join us on the next Legal Lines with Beau Box. Hello, welcome to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. I'm pleased to have on the show today Beau Box. Beau is a commercial real estate broker here in town. He's been doing it for a long time and handled a lot of big deals. Beau, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Locke. Thanks for being here.
Give us a little educational background, kind of establish your expertise in all this.
I went to LSU and I have a degree in economics, and I have been in the business in Baton Rouge for 14 years now.
And initially, I guess you started out like the typical real estate guy or real
estate agent?
I
started out back in '92 working underneath some older senior commercial realtors in Baton Rouge, and learned and went through probably a 2-year intern phase where I learned the business and worked underneath 3 guys, and that's kind of how I got my start.
And give the folks an idea of some of the clients that they would recognize, names, if you don't mind.
Locally, I represent Amedisys. I represent Cox Media, Cox Cable, Home Depot, McDonald's. Those are some of my
big boys,
bigger clients.
Let's talk about. We're going to talk about the commercial real estate market and kind of the process if you decide you want to buy or sell. But before we dive into that, let's talk about investing in real estate. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I get probably 4 or 5 calls a day from people that want to get into investing in commercial real estate, and there's a big difference between a commercial real estate transaction and a residential transaction.
What is it?
Well, mainly it's a little more sophisticated to buy a multi-tenant strip center or an office building than it is to buy a single-family residence. And I have a lot of people that want to jump from residential investing, whereas they own 4 or 5 single-family rent houses, and they want to sell those and buy some land or a strip center or an office building, because theoretically a strip center or warehouse building is less management intensive than owning a single-family residence. So that's primarily what the questions I get asked on a daily basis. How can I get into commercial real estate investing? And it's a tough.
What do you say? I mean,
it's a tough deal.
You're distinguishing the two.
First thing, I guess, to distinguish, what are your goals? What age are you? What are your retirement goals? Where do you want to end up? Do you want income? Do you want a piece of vacant land? Do you want to have hands-on stuff? So my primary area of expertise is retail and office. That's what I do most of. Retail strip centers, retail developments, big box retail development like Home Depot. And I usually advise people to start out small with a smaller strip center or a small warehouse and grow from there, but get their feet wet first.
And the reason somebody would purportedly jump from residential kind of investment to commercial is it's less management?
In theory, if you have a retail strip center with 10 tenants in it, the tenants pay their proportionate share of the taxes, the insurance, the maintenance, and everything that goes with the operating expenses associated with that strip center. So, in theory, the tenants pay for all that.
So you can make more money.
You can make more money. So you still have.
In theory, does it happen?
Well, it doesn't always happen that way. It doesn't always happen that way. But most people also hire a management group to manage a larger property. If it's smaller, under $2 million, most people manage themselves. If it's a larger property, then most people have a management firm to do all that.
And so the Home Depots and such, they don't own their buildings; they're leasing them.
Home Depot owns all their own real estate, and they. But in Home Depot development, there might be another retailer or a strip center that's not a part of the Home Depot or a Lowe's or a Walmart, and a strip center on the side of a Walmart or a Lowe's we call a shadow center, and those are big investment targets. People love to have shadow centers next to a big boy. Right.
Okay.
Right.
So the factors to determine whether you jump into this kind of investment, you said one, don't jump in feet first. You got to come in slow. but also is your age and what you're looking for. Income versus, I guess, appreciation, meaning the value goes up over time?
That's correct. And a lot of people have the time to manage something and the money, and they don't mind handling the day-to-day stuff. But if you're in your late 60s and you don't have the time or don't want to fool with it, then you need to step back and say, well, is there going to be enough appreciation before I need to retire and liquidate and have liquid assets before I invest $2 or $3 million in a piece of real estate, because real estate is not liquid. So
meaning what?
Meaning you can't sell it fast and get your cash back if you need it. So if you're at retirement age or near retirement age, then probably investing in income producing real estate, you probably have to think twice about it.
Now, we're saying income producing real estate. Define that for me. I mean, I know we kind of know what you're talking about.
No, that's a good question. Something that has one or more multiple tenants where they pay rent but they don't own it. So that could be an apartment complex, a strip center, a warehouse building, anything other than land, basically.
And the hope is that the income exceeds the cost associated with purchasing the property.
Correct.
And you're earning more money by getting rental income in than you do in some other investment, whatever it is.
That's correct. And typically we analyze income streams by using a cap rate, a capitalization rate, and you would hope to achieve a 9 or 10% cap rate or higher.
Meaning rate of return?
Yes.
Okay.
On an income stream on an investment property.
So if I buy $1 million piece of property, I would hope to generate $100,000.
Around between $90,000 and $100,000 of return.
Over and above my expenses associated with the investment.
That's correct.
And is that typical? Is that typically what happens?
There again, in theory, in a perfect world, that's what people strive for, but it's not always that easy. It's very difficult to get. 5 years ago, you could buy Walgreens or CVS leases that are triple net 30-year leases for 7 and 8% cap rates, meaning a 7 or 8% return. Nowadays, those Walgreens are selling for 4, 5, and 6%. So there's a spread. What's greater than a CD, or what's greater than you think you can earn potentially in the stock market, is usually the spread that's attributed to a commercial real estate investment property. So there's a benefit to owning real estate. There's appreciation. Obviously, you can go out and touch it. There's also depreciation you can write off on your taxes. So, but it's not liquid.
And you can exchange it.
And you can do exchanges. So
huge.
A big part of my business is what's called a 1031 exchange, and the IRS allows for people to exchange property and defer the capital gain.
Meaning the money they've made from the sale.
If they sell property A and they have $1 million worth of capital gain, they can defer the gain for they can defer the gain into perpetuity as long as they buy a replacement property within 180 days of sale of the other property. And that way they don't have to pay the taxes. They eventually would, but they're deferring the tax.
All right, I'd like to go into that further on the next segment, and let's also talk about this phenomenon that is occurring in Destin and Orange Beach and Gulf Shores, Alabama, of all these condos and pre-sales.
Sure.
This is Locke Meredith, Legal Lines of Beau Box, commercial real estate broker here in town. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Again, pleased to have on the show Beau Box. He's a commercial real estate broker here in town, and we're talking about real estate investments and what you should get into, and if so. Beau, again, thanks for being on the show.
Glad to be here.
We talked about warehouses and strip malls and that kind of stuff. And while we were off the air just then, you indicated that really it just depends on your expertise in dealing with those investments as to which one is recommended.
Right. And a lot of people, there are people with a skill set associated with apartment complexes, 200 and 300 units and up, or people that only want to own warehouses or office buildings. Each investor typically has a skill set that they understand a given property, and they don't vary from that typically.
And so you better either know what you're doing or make sure you hire somebody that
correct.
does.
That's correct.
Let's shift gears. We sign off just then talking about this phenomenon along the beaches, and that is these condos and
That's
how
right.
prices have just gone
crazy.
out of the roof.
Gone crazy.
Give me your thoughts on all that.
Well, that's the other question. People ask me or approach me on a weekly basis and say,
I guess so.
I'm investing or thinking about investing in a condominium in Destin or Orange Beach or Pensacola, and there's a lot of people making a lot of money on flipping, what we call flipping contracts, where they never
pre-construct sales, right?
They never actually take possession of the real estate. They buy a position in a development, and they flip their contract, and they can make anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000.
So let's break this down a little bit slower.
Correct.
Let's say I decide I'm going to do one of those pre-sale condo deals in Gulf Shores or Orange Beach, and I got my letter of credit from the bank and my $10,000 or $15,000 or whatever it takes to buy in the deal, and I agree from the builder in advance of construction to buy his condo on the front for $750,000. Now I give him what? Some cash down.
Typically 5% is a deposit and a letter of credit.
That says a letter of credit that I have to buy from the bank in essence.
Right, that says you can perform in the event that you do actually take title and buy and own the condominium.
All right, and in exchange for giving him this letter of credit, which is the voucher by my bank,
right,
and the 5% down payment on whatever price we've agreed upon,
right,
I get a contract and the promise to get my condo when I do that.
Correct.
And then I turn around and somebody says, hey man, that's the best condo in the whole place. I want to buy it from you. I'm going to give you $1 million for it.
Right.
I flip it.
You flip the contract, or your position, you sell your position to another buyer, and in a perfect world, I guess you would make anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000.
In other words, unrealistic to think that I would get someone to come and pay me $250,000 more.
I never say never, but I think that's probably a little bit aggressive.
Okay. And so when we say we flip it, what I'm doing is I'm assigning all my rights that I
Correct.
have under that contract with the builder in exchange for the person buying it from me for whatever price we agree upon.
Right. So you're no longer liable to perform under the contract and actually take title. You don't have to do that, but somebody else would conceivably buy it. But that could take place. There could be 3 or 4 layers of owners before the final construction.
This could happen multiple times.
That's correct.
Now, what happens if I flip this contract over to somebody else and they pay me, $50,000? Am I still liable?
No.
Do I need the permission of the builder?
You need the permission of the builder, and you have to have a release signed by both the developer and yourself and the new owner. So everybody, there's a disclosure to all parties.
And typically they do that, but they only do it if they are sure that the person...
That new person has to have a letter of credit also. So they have to be just as qualified, or probably more qualified, because there again, the price has gone up.
So the risk is, if you go into this as an investment strategy, that you're going to do a deal with the builder, and then you hope somebody comes along. They may not come along,
Correct.
And you got to perform, or somebody does come along, but the builder and the developer and whoever else has to sign off doesn't go for it.
That's correct. So the
does
risk,
that happen?
Yes, it does. The risk is that, and rarely, but the risk is that you are in essence stuck with buying it because you can't flip it for more than you have into it, or you can't find somebody to buy it. Now, I've never heard of that happening yet, not to say that it won't, and it probably will once the coast gets overbuilt or as built up as it can get, which is just around
Pretty
the corner.
close, yeah.
Typically,
what is the rate of return for somebody flipping a contract like that?
I don't think there is a typical rate of return. I think there's more typical rates of profit associated with a contract flip for each development. So each development could have, as it gets closer to final delivery, the amount would go up. And I've heard people flipping contracts for $20,000 within a week of execution, but the condo may not be delivered for 12 to 14 months.
It takes a long time to build.
Correct. So,
what is the largest return that you've heard on someone who did the initial pre-sale with the contract and flips it right when possession's able to be taken?
I've probably heard of people making $100,000 to $150,000 within 2 weeks.
Amazing. What do you recommend in that
Well,
scenario? You better be a pretty tough character and have some cheese behind you.
Yeah, you have to have, and you would have to be prepared to perform and buy it and own it. Otherwise, if you can't go into it with enough money to own it and pay the condo dues, pay the insurance, which is now skyrocketing.
What are the insurances of condo dues?
Oh man, you could pay for a 3 or 4 bedroom unit in Orange Beach. You might pay $1,500 to $2,000 a month in dues and expenses associated with owning that, including your insurance. So
plus the note on the debt if you
correct,
finance
plus
it.
the note. And what's important to know, if you look at what's required by a bank for a investment home or a second home, you really only need 10 to 20% equity or cash down payment. So the amount that you're putting down in the note cannot be covered by rental income.
And that's changed over the years.
It used to be when I was a kid, you could buy a condo in Destin or Fort Walton for a couple $100,000, and you could rent it out and make money. Now you can't do that. So unless you pay all cash for it, and then you don't have a return. So they're not good investments as far as for rental income unless you buy it extremely cheap. And that's rare.
So the sole way you're going to make money on these things
is appreciation,
which means what you bought it for 10 years later, it's worth a lot more.
That's correct. And we all hear these stories. My in-laws bought one. My parents bought one for $500,000 last year, and they got offered $1 million last week. And those are all true. The problem is if those people sell and make a $500,000 profit, they got to turn right back around and buy another one. So they still own $1 million condo and their expenses have gone up. So do they want to stay there and own $1 million property with higher expenses, or do they want to get out of the market altogether? So it depends on, again, what your goals are with the property.
Let's talk about the 1031 exchange and how it plays in all of this, and then let's talk about your typical leases and real estate contracts and such on the next segment.
Okay.
This is Locke Meredith, Legal Lines, and Beau Box. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Again, pleased to have on the show Beau Box. He's a commercial real estate broker here in town, and we're talking about the Orange Beach Gulf Shores condo deals. Let's kind of wrap that up, but first talk about if you sell a condo or you flip it, you're going to owe your involuntary partner, Uncle Sam, the government, a chunk of change.
Right. And capital gains have gone down as to a few years ago. They were almost 40%. Now they're down to 15%. So
which is huge.
Which is still a lot of money. But there again, if you're going to sell an investment property, now they say now is a good time to sell it because the capital gains rate is only 15%. I don't think it's going to get any lower. It could only go higher.
Isn't it scheduled to go up in 2008
I think in 2008 it goes back up, and I think it slowly goes up.
So if you're going to sell anything, frankly, that you would owe the government capital gains on, between now and 2008 is the time to do it.
That's correct.
On the other hand, you better be ready to pay Uncle Sam some cheese.
Right.
15% is 15%.
Right.
Or come up with an alternative strategy to avoid that. And we kind of briefly talked about it, and that was the 1031 exchange.
The alternative is something that's been around for about 10 years. It's called a 1031 exchange. And the IRS allows you to defer your capital gain portion.
Meaning not pay on the money.
Not paying it. You don't have to pay your taxes into perpetuity. You never have to pay it as long as you continuously own and defer the tax. You in theory, never have to pay it. But eventually, whoever owns the property, they will either pass away or they liquidate a partnership. The estate will get it, or the heirs will get it. Somebody gets it eventually. Correct.
And so the way it works is, if I sell a condo and I made $500,000, or let's say I made $1 million, I owe Uncle Sam $150,000.
Correct.
Unless I turn around and take that money that I made and put it in another piece of property within 180 days.
The way it works, you have a total of 180 days to close on a new sale. Of that 180 days, I believe it's 45 days. You have to elect or identify 3 properties, and you have to buy one of those 3. If you don't, then you pay the penalty. So you cannot take possession of the funds. They have to be held by a qualified intermediary, and that person keeps them in an escrow account. And once you identify, or rather purchase one of the 3 identified properties, the intermediary funds it with the money. So you never take possession of it.
And so you've avoided paying $150,000, but you don't have the other $850,000 to spend. So that's kind of one of the factors you got to consider.
Correct.
Let's shift gears. You're a real estate commercial broker. Let's talk about the typical contracts that you deal with, or that an individual who decides that they either want to buy some commercial real estate or sell some commercial real estate, and really kind of the same analysis when you're looking at residential properties. Somebody comes to you and they say, look, Beau, I got this piece of property or this business, and I'm looking for a piece of property, commercial real estate. What do they do?
Well, a lot of it depends on whether they're going to be a tenant or an owner.
So you got to decide whether you're going to lease or own.
Right, and today it's better if you have the equity or the cash down payment. It's better to own because rates are low. Rates typically you can float your interest rate now at 5.8, 6%, or lock into a permanent at around anywhere from 6.5 to 7.5%, depending on the bank and the terms. But it's cheaper to own something than it is to rent it now if you have the equity. So that's the first question. And if you
are rates expected to go up, or do
yes,
you see
they
them
are.
going up over time?
We are, and I think they're expected to go up in the next couple of years. How high they go, who knows? But we think that in the next couple of years they could hover around 8 or 9%.
At which point you shift from perhaps being an owner to being a
correct.
tenant.
Then it starts being more or easier, cheaper to be a tenant than it is to own something.
All right. So let's say we decide to buy. What's the next step?
Well, once you identify a piece of property, the first thing we do in commercial real estate is start with a letter of intent to give somebody enough time to analyze environmental, title, survey, wetlands issues if there are any, and see if they can get a loan. And appraisal. The bank's going to require these days on a commercial property, 95% of transactions have to have a Phase 1 environmental report done.
All right. Now, before you get to that point, I was interested in finding out that you guys don't use the MLS book, which is what your typical housing, residential real estate folks use.
Correct.
You have your own database that deals strictly with commercial properties.
That's correct. Which is fairly new. MLS really, in years past, never had commercial properties on it. So when you were a commercial practitioner,
you just had to know where
you had
it was,
to know everything. You had to know who to call and know what was selling and how much it was selling for, or do your homework. And now we have what's called LACDB, which is an acronym for Louisiana Commercial Database, and it's available to all commercial real estate brokers in the state.
All right, and so I come to you and say, look, I'd like to find this commercial piece. This is my business. You go to that database and you try and find properties that would satisfy my criteria.
Right, that's one of the things we do. But then a lot of it is just knowing the market. I would say that less than half of the things I do are even listed on LACDB because it might be a for sale by owner. It might be something that's not for sale. There's a lot of commercial practitioners that know the market well enough to where they don't have to reach out to LACDB. So,
all right, so you don't only limit your inquiry to that document, but you also know where properties are for sale.
That's correct.
Or where they might meet the criteria.
That's correct.
And just go approach the
It's
folks.
just knowing the market is the main thing. You got to know your market, whether it's Baton Rouge, New Orleans, or...
All right. And then, so you ID the property. The next step is to start negotiating with the guy who's selling it. And you said you use a letter of intent, and that's basically outlining price, what you want them to do, what you got to be permitted to do. And let's say that is signed off by me. I agree. And the other side, after we haggle around, they sign off on it. What's the next step?
Once the main business points are agreed to and there's a contract, the first thing that people should do is meet with their lender, and the lender would authorize a Phase 1 and an appraisal to be done, and probably a survey if there's not a recent survey. And even if there is a recent survey, most people get it updated and have their name printed on it and have it recorded in the courthouse. And
the reason for all those gyrations is to make sure what you're buying is really clean and clear.
That's correct. That's correct.
People who say they own it actually own it. It's not liened by any IRS liens or judgment creditors or mortgages.
That's correct.
So when they sell it, it's yours.
That's right. And along with that, the attorney for the buyer would order an abstract of title to make sure the title's good. If there's wetlands, if it's a land transaction where there's a lot of land, the wetlands determination would probably take 30 to 60 days. Getting a wetlands mitigation permit to fill might take 12 to 18 months, and that would be issued by the Corps of Engineers.
Long process.
Long process.
Let's say the deal goes down. how do you guys get paid? I mean, there's a contract that you enter into with me.
Right. Usually we don't get paid until the sale is closed or lease is executed. It depends on what type of transaction it is. So I usually either am hired as a tenant rep broker or as a listing agent for a specific piece of property.
Beau, thanks so much for being
Thanks a
on
lot.
the show. Appreciate
Enjoyed it.
it.
Yes.
It's Locke Meredith, Beau Box. Thanks for being with us.